At the end of the 19th century, the Danish king Christian IX and his queen Louisa succeeded in marrying their 6 children into the leading European royal families, and Christian IX thus became known as the father-in-law of Europe. Today, his family are found all over Europe, and these royal descendants have, quite exceptionally, chosen to come together and talk about their family's incredible story, which they know from letters and diaries, and from the stories that have been passed down to them through the generations. In addition, the family has also made private photos and films available, many of which have never been seen in public before. This episode is about Christian IX's second oldest daughter, Dagmar, and her son, the last Tsar of Russia, who together with his wife and children would be executed. The two sisters, Princess Alexandra and Dagmar, love spending time together and are unaware that they will one day be married to Europe's 2 most powerful monarchs. Brown-eyed Dagmar is the youngest of the sisters.
They had a very close family life. They lived a very simple life because the parents were, of course, not king and queen at that time.
Dagmar is the only member of the family that enjoys reading, and she already speaks several languages. "16-year-old Dagmar's life now takes a dramatic turn. Her father has just become King of Denmark. Her brother, Wilhelm, has been made King of Greece, and her sister, Alexandra, has married the heir to the British throne. Queen Louisa has begun to think about a marriage for her daughter Dagmar. And one thing in particular must be considered when planning a royal marriage.
Where would it be suitable to have a good connection and political relationship? And so, with very, very few exceptions, I think it was always an arranged marriage. And in a way, I think they got on pretty well. You learn to love the person that it would be suitable to marry, and well, they had lots of children, so they can't have been too unhappy, I would say.
Tsar Alexander II, of Russia's oldest son, Grand Duke Nicholas, announces his arrival. 20-year-old Nicholas is the perfect prince. Not only is he very handsome, he is also charming, intelligent, and a writer of poetry. Nicholas's first photo of Dagmar had been given to him when Dagmar was just 12 years old. He was entranced by the slim girl in the picture, and he had collected photos of her ever since. The meeting between them is a complete success. Nicholas is not for a moment in doubt about his feelings for Dagmar, and the feelings are clearly mutual. Dagmar and Nixa, as she calls him, become engaged. And after the engagement, they scratch their names on a window of the Summer Palace in Fredensborg. Accepting her role as the future Tsarina of Russia, Dagmar converts to the Russian Orthodox Church.
Russia seemed to be her destiny, and what better way to get into your new habits and your new life than by learning the language. And she learned Russian by reading Hans Christian Andersen in Russian. Very clever and very up-to-date, since he was in the middle of his glorious career at the time.
A loving relationship quickly develops. Yet Dagmar remains in Denmark when Nicholas travels to France to stay in the Tsar's villa in Nice. The newly engaged couple write to each other almost daily. Then Nicholas's letters suddenly stop. "I am completely despondent that my dear little Nixa writes to me so rarely. I feel quite unhappy and forgotten. Why this awful silence?"
She was certainly in love with Nixa, Nikolai Alexandrovich. And it must have been a frightful shock when she was suddenly, quite suddenly told that they had to go to Nice because he was badly ill.
Dagmar receives a telegram from the Tsar. Nikolai has been given the last rites. Pray for us and come if it's at all possible. Dagmar immediately catches a train to Frankfurt, from where she continues on to France in the company of the Tsar. Once in France, Emperor Napoleon III cancels all normal services on the route to Nice and orders that the Tsar's special train to be driven at 3 times normal speed, and they make it to Nicholas, who is suffering from meningitis and partly paralyzed as a result.
When all hope was out and he was dying, he personally asked his younger brother, Alexander, to overtake Dagmar as his fiancée.
Nicholas dies, and his brother Alexander is proclaimed the new heir. Even though Nicholas is dead, his mother has not given up hope of having Dagmar as daughter-in-law.
Probably in Russia we felt we had enough German blood. So, and everybody was already a cousin of somebody else's. So it's, these intermarriages, constant intermarriages, are not even good genetically in a way.
Dagmar's mother can also see the advantages of a Danish-Russian marriage.
It was total fate for Alexander, and he was very philosophical about what was going to happen. There was no choice. He was the next son, and that was it.
After a year of mourning, Alexander arrives in Denmark, and 3 weeks later he proposes to Dagmar. Alexander is awkward, and nor does he have the intelligence of his dead brother. Yet he is good-natured.
He was a great bear of a man, Alexander. Sasha, they called him. Huge man, immensely strong. He could bend horseshoes. He could bend the family silver. I don't think it was very popular with some of the family, but he could do it.
3 months after Alexander's proposal, 18-year-old Dagmar has to take her leave of Denmark and sails for St. Petersburg to be married. When the dreadful moment came when I was to take leave of my beloved papa and mama, I could have leapt into the sea from despair. The 6th of the world's landmass is under the control of Tsar Alexander II's empire. As the sun is setting in St. Petersburg, it is already beginning to rise in eastern Siberia. Whilst the Romanovs' lifestyle is extravagant, the majority of the population are impoverished peasants.
The Winter Palace is one of the grandest things you can imagine.
The palace consists of over 1,000 rooms, sumptuously decorated in gold, silver, malachite and marble. Every day, 1,200 servants skate around polishing the many thousand square meters of floor with a brush fastened to one of their feet.
It's quite obvious that this show of force, show of wealth, was meant for every dignitary who entered to feel that now, surely, he must be at the very center, at the very place where power is held, only to discover behind the next door is even grander. And God knows when he met the Tsar, it must have been out of this world.
This is the world Dagmar arrives into from the modest conditions of Denmark. And she spends her first couple of weeks in the Winter Palace learning the procedures and ceremonies of the Russian court.
The Russian court was very, very stiff. They were very circumscribed, formal, unchanging, rigid. And it must have been very difficult for her to adapt to that.
The sumptuous wedding takes place later in the year. Yet Dagmar's parents do not take part.
Christian IX and Queen Louise were unable to attend their daughter's wedding because they didn't have the necessary money to give a big enough show amongst the other royal courts of Europe. And they felt it was better that they stayed away.
Instead, Denmark is represented by Crown Prince Frederick, while England sends Dagmar's brother-in-law, the heir to the throne, Edward. 2 young men who throw themselves into the busy nightly festivities. And on his wedding night, the groom writes in his diary, I removed my slippers and my silver-woven dressing gown and felt my love's body against my own. What I then felt I have no wish to describe here. We talked for a long time afterwards. Dagmar is given a new, more Russian-sounding name, and as Maria Fedorovna, she travels to Moscow with her husband to be officially presented. In this connection, a young composer has been given his first commission, and he has written a celebratory overture for the occasion. The young man's name is Tchaikovsky. Alexander and Maria, as she's now called, move into the Anichkov Palace in St. Petersburg. And Maria quickly learns to appreciate a life full of fantastic dresses, fabulous jewels, and magnificent balls.
She had a very happy life in Russia. She liked her. She became very happy with Alexander, who doted on her. And she became the mother of a large family.
A year and a half after her wedding, Maria's first child is born, and her in-laws are present at the actual birth. This bothered me immensely. The Emperor held me by my one hand, my Sasha by the other, whilst every so often the Empress kissed me. The new heir, Nicholas, who later will become known as the last Tsar, is joined by further siblings in the years that follow. And Alexander, who is harsh in the extreme with all others, is completely different when it comes to his own children.
He was a very, very, very amusing father. He played games with them. They played hockey on ice. He liked to be with the children.
Life becomes less secure for the imperial family during these years.
In Russia, of course, there were several of these very much leftist groups that simply had the idea that by killing the Tsar, they would start a revolution.
And soon a clear warning is given about what the future holds. The dining room in the Winter Palace is destroyed by an explosion. Had the dinner guests not been delayed, the entire senior branch of the Romanov family would have been wiped out. Disaster strikes when an 8th attempt is made on the life of Maria's father-in-law. 2 homemade bombs explode as Alexander II is out driving near the palace. And the dying Tsar is quickly taken to the Winter Palace. Maria and Alexander arrive shortly after. Maria, who had been on her way out to skate, is still wearing her blue skating uniform, and she hugs her skates to her. His legs were completely crushed and torn up to the knees. A bleeding mass with half a boot on the right foot. All that was left of the left was the sole of his foot. The Tsar dies, and his son is proclaimed Tsar Alexander III, whilst Maria becomes the new Tsarina. My peace and calm are gone, for now I can never again rest assured about Sasha.
Tsar Alexander II had been something of a liberator. He wanted to improve the conditions of the poorer people of Russia.
Together with his younger brother Constantine, Alexander II had created a new democratic constitution, which was ready to be made public when he was killed.
When Alexander III came to the throne, who was much more conservative and narrow-minded, he removed his uncle Grand Duke Constantine and sent him into exile in Siberia.
Alexander III immediately rips the new democratic constitution into pieces. Maria and Alexander soon realize that they will have to leave the capital.
The secret police did not like the idea of the Tsar and his whole family living inside the walls of a palace in the middle of a city that had so many entrances and so many corridors and so many rooms and you name it.
the family moved to a much more secure palace in Gatchina, 50 kilometers from St. Petersburg. Even though Gatchina has 900 rooms, the family do not live extravagantly. They move into the mezzanine, the former servants' quarters.
Gatchina was horrid, and Alexander III chose as his apartments the lowest rooms with the lowest ceiling. I don't know why. I mean, he had very bad taste. Let's be frank.
In his small study with its worn furniture, Alexander indulges his passion for music. And he masters everything from the drums to the tuba. After 2 years on the throne, the coronation takes place at the Kremlin at Easter. The ceremony ends with the crowning of Maria. Sasha placed the crown upon me, after which the old matrons of honor fastened it, which was an exceedingly unpleasant moment, since they always stuck in the wrong place, and always in my head. "8,000 guests take part in the coronation celebrations. But the future is far from certain. A group of students have planned to assassinate Alexander on the 6th anniversary of his father's death. It is planned to take place in connection with the imperial family's visit to the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral, and the students are ready with hollowed-out books filled with dynamite.
The police discovered it fairly early, and they were tried and condemned to death, to be hanged.
Alexander Ulyanov is amongst the 5 students who are hanged. His little brother swears revenge and makes good on his oath 30 years later, when he becomes known by the name Lenin. Maria and Alexander's 5 children are now between 6 and 20 years old, and a new serious shock awaits them all.
When my grandmother, the Grand Duchess Olga, was about 6 years old, they were traveling on a train with the whole family and her parents, and the train was derailed, and my grandmother was thrown out of the train because it turned over. Later she was told that her father had held the roof of the carriage up alone because he was so strong, so all the family could get out of the train carriage and reach safety.
The imperial family survive, but 22 others lose their lives.
It was never known if it was because the train was going too fast or if it was an attempt on the life of the Tsar family.
Maria and Alexander live under very tight security, and Russia has turned into a police state. But the family have an escape.
The family went to Denmark, I believe, almost every year, usually in the late summer, in August and September, and they always went by the sea in one of the royal yachts.
On the journey to Copenhagen, they are accompanied by over 100 courtiers, an incalculable amount of baggage, and a cow, so the children can be given fresh milk on the way.
Alexander enjoyed Denmark a lot because he felt very safe and secure in this country. And I think also the tone in the court at that time, but also in the country as general, was very easygoing. And that sort of precipitated the joker in himself. So he was a very fun-loving person and enjoyed doing jokes with the family.
As the Swedish King Oscar would find out to his cost.
Alexander had discovered a hose in the upstairs room, and he was playing around with this hose. He looked out of the window, and to his great joy, King Oscar was walking past. So he let him have it, you see, absolutely like this with the hose. He was furious and ran straight to King Christian and said, "Those dreadful children, dare they, Anyway, and so King sent for them to be told it wasn't us, and it was discovered it was the Tsar. But the King of Sweden wasn't very pleased, and he went away.
One day, Alexander drives into Copenhagen without informing anyone.
He also lost himself, or got lost purposely in Copenhagen, wandered about on his own and chatted up people on the street, which also created a lot of panic among the Russian court because they couldn't find him.
The heir Nicholas also enjoys being in Denmark, and he enjoys spending time with his taller cousins, the heirs to the Greek and British thrones. And the Tsarina feels so much at home that she allows herself to be swung around by one of her nephews. Like her nephews and nieces, Maria loves animals.
They went to the zoo, and she was wearing a very big brimmed hat with cherries on it, which seems, in retrospect, perhaps unwise. They went to the monkey cage, and when Marie got too close, the monkey lunged and grabbed the hat by the cherry, and this struggle ensued. And eventually the monkey let go, and the hat, which was held onto the head by an elastic, snapped back onto the head and ended up over one ear, much to the horror of the wearer, but to the immense enjoyment not only of my grandfather, but of all the little crowd of onlookers who were there too.
Dinner is the only formal meal. Lunch and breakfast are managed without servants.
I remember my grandmother Ingeborg telling me that at breakfast, Aunt Minnie, which was Marie Feodorovna, she had little eggs or little Fabergé put next to every single person, because at that time that was like a little souvenir.
Carl Fabergé, the fabulous goldsmith from St. Petersburg, is a regular purveyor to the Tsar.
The Easter eggs that Carl Fabergé made for the imperial family were simply exquisite. And every year he would design a new egg that the Tsar could give to the Tsarina.
The first egg that Fabergé makes takes its inspiration from an egg Maria's mother has in Denmark, an egg full of surprises. Drought and famine devastate the country, and millions of Russians starve to death or fall victim to a cholera epidemic. The rural population heads for the cities in search of work, and Russia borrows an enormous sum from France to start work on the world's longest construction project, the Trans-Siberian Railway to the Far East. (1892) is also the year in which Maria and Alexander can grace the premiere of Tchaikovsky's new ballet, The Nutcracker.
Alexander III was an intelligent man, a powerful man, but he had absolutely not enough vision to change things. He froze Russia. Russia became a bloc.
Europe is split in two, with Germany, Austria and Italy on one side, and Russia and France on the other. Maria and Alexander's oldest son and heir, Nicholas, is now 25 years old, and it's now his duty to marry and ensure that the dynasty continues. After a direct order from his father, he is forced to break off his relationship with a 17-year-old Polish dancer. And Maria selects a French princess as suitable match for her son, in the knowledge that this can only strengthen Russia's new alliance with France. But Nicholas does not share his mother's enthusiasm. "I wish to move in one direction, and it is clear that Mama wishes me to choose the other. My dream is to one day marry Alex. Nicholas has fallen in love with the German princess Alexandra of Hessen, who his parents are clearly not impressed by. They do not think that the shy princess will be capable of coping with the task of being Tsarina. Yet the otherwise weak Nicholas announces that if he cannot have Alex, as he calls her, then he will not marry at all.
Alexander III became ill, and his doctors advised him that he should move to a warmer climate.
The Tsar leaves for his palace at Livadia by the Black Sea, and here he battles with a kidney illness, which continues to weaken him. Nicholas is with his father when Alex arrives, and Alexander makes her surprisingly welcome and gives his blessing to the young couple from his deathbed. Maria is holding her husband when, aged 49, he draws his last breath. Nicholas is inconsolable.
Nicholas II didn't like to be the Tsar of Russia. Actually, when his father died, he said, "Oh no, I don't want to be the Tsar."
He said, "I'm Emperor, what am I to do now? I don't know anything." Not his fault, mind you. It's the fault of his father. He should have given him a proper education.
1 week after Alexander's funeral, Nicholas and Alex are married in the Winter Palace. But Maria maintains her position as the country's first lady. At official engagements, she allows herself to be accompanied by Nicholas, whilst Alex has to follow behind, accompanied by one of the uncles, and Maria wouldn't dream of handing over the crown jewels to Alex. At the coronation, it is also the Tsar's mother who rides in the most distinguished carriage, immediately behind him in the cortege, whilst his wife follows behind. A great outdoor party is held to conclude the coronation festivities, yet it turns into a disaster.
The crowds got panicky when they were told that they were running out of beer and food, and they charged towards where the food was, and the ones that fell in the front were trampled by the ones at the back.
Thousands of people lose their lives. But when the imperial couple greet the crowds at the same place later in the evening, they are unaware that there are still covered bodies in the area, and that further bodies have been hidden under the imperial podium. Yet the whole of Russia soon learns that the pair had accepted the crowd salute whilst they sat on top on their subjects' dead bodies. Nicholas's reign had got off to the worst possible start. Russia's new Tsar loves to swim. This he often does with a group of officers, and ideally not wearing any swimming costume. Nicholas can still relax when in private. Yet under the surface, the family is facing serious problems. After 7 years' marriage, Alex has given birth to 4 children, but they are all girls.
Nikolai did not have the same, political stamina that his father did. And at the same time, his Tsarina was, you could say, probably not up to the job. She was, I'm sure, a very kind person, but she was extremely naive and even overly religious.
In the summer of 1904, Alex finally gives birth to a son.
Happiness was enormous, not only in their family, but all over Russia. But this joy very soon became a tragedy.
Demonstrators in St. Petersburg demand higher wages and a shorter working week. A large crowd approaches the palace.
Nicholas II wasn't in the Winter Palace at that time, but his policemen and soldiers were standing outside. So when they saw this mob coming against them, they opened fire, and they killed a lot of Russians there. And after that, Nicholas II was called the Bloody Tsar.
Many hundreds of peaceful demonstrators have been killed, and this results in dissatisfaction turning into rebellion. There are mutinies in both the army and the navy, and Nicholas's uncle is murdered. Rail strikes paralyze Russia, and from his study, Nicholas writes to his mother. After the railways, the strike spread to the factories and businesses. Imagine the disgrace. Meetings, a fine new fashionable word, have been held where one openly and freely debated and gave support to an armed uprising. Nicholas is forced to sign a constitution that promises to introduce rights for the middle classes and a democratically elected parliament, the Duma. The imperial family isolates itself in the Alexander Palace outside of the capital. Nicholas and Alex have 4 healthy daughters: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. But they bear a terrible secret about their little son.
He had hemophilia, which he had inherited through the female line, through his mother. So he was never very strong.
We know how they suffered and how much it had also a negative impact on Russian politics, on Russian life, because this family was concentrated in doing their best possible for the child that was sick.
Sent for by Alex, the 2-meter-tall, long-haired, disheveled Rasputin now makes his entrance at the palace. Rasputin, who has previously drawn attention to himself through his drinking and womanizing, now considers himself a holy man. Alex begins to venerate him when on a number of occasions he manages to stop her son Alexei's bleeding, and Rasputin starts to gain influence over the Tsar's decisions.
He was forced by his wife to accept Rasputin. He didn't like so much Rasputin himself, but he was so much under the thumb of his wife, who would say, if we don't see Rasputin and if he doesn't come, our son is going to die. So with that sentimental blackmail, he would accept Rasputin. But Nicholas II was weak, but somehow he was down to earth, even if he had no knowledge of what was going on. Whereas the Empress was totally lost in mystical clouds. She had no link with reality whatsoever.
Summer 1913. 9-year-old Alexei loves spending time by the water, and when given the opportunity, he loves using the strength he has. But his illness often forces him to take it easy. And when his peers fool around and swim, he has to make do with conducting them from the dock. Any small cut might cost him his life. Alexei's condition is a state secret, yet the population sense that not everything is quite as it should be. Alexei's 4 sisters are now aged between 12 and 17 years old, and the responsibility for their upbringing lies with their mother.
She never allowed the daughters to go out, so they were practically, they had no sense of reality, and they remained very childish. They never saw anyone. That's why the only men they ever saw were the officers, and they would play with them, perhaps they would fall in love with them, but they never saw anyone.
The Tsar's youngest daughter, 12-year-old Anastasia, regularly writes to her father, telling him about her daily life. Tatiana and Olga are here. I am sitting and digging in my nose with my left hand. Olga wanted to slap me, but I ran away from her Swedish hand. In 1913, the imperial couple, with Alexei at their side, can celebrate the fact that the Romanovs have been on the throne for 300 years. Yet from now on, things will quickly go downhill.
All the European royalty had links between them by marriage, by friendship. This could not stop the big catastrophe in 1914.
The First World War breaks out, and Russia is on the side of the Allies, against Alex's native country, Germany. Alex sets up a military hospital and together with the oldest daughters works as a nurse. We were busy all morning. A soldier died during an operation. It was very sad. The girls were brave. They had never before witnessed a death. Oh, how close death is. Alex is a great influence on Nicholas, and she constantly puts him under pressure. Have them tremble before you. You are too friendly, and everyone takes advantage of this. Nicholas removes the army's supreme commander and takes over command of the Russian troops himself. Be Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Tsar Pavel. Crush them all under your feet. Do not laugh, naughty boy, but I desire to see you together with all these men. At the same time, Rasputin's influence over Alex continues to grow.
With all the turmoil, all the political turmoil and the various smaller revolts, she confided a lot more in Rasputin, who took advantage of all this. And the eventual killing of Rasputin did not come one day too early.
He was getting so much in the way of so many people that understood that this man was only a danger for Russia.
Two counts decide to take the matter into their own hands.
My uncle Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry hatched a plot, and they invited Rasputin to the Yusupov Palace, where Felix had an apartment for cakes and wine, and they poisoned the cakes. They poisoned the wine. Rasputin ate the cakes and drank the wine, and nothing happened.
In the end, Felix Yusupov said enough is enough. He went down and shot him, and they all had drinks, said it's done. And they heard noises, and they looked around, and there he was creeping up the stairs. So they really panicked, and Rasputin, wounded, ran out in the courtyard.
Here he was shot again, after which he was thrown into the Neva River.
During the First World War, Russians are not doing that well. And of course, with a war going on and with a lot of resources being used to that war, there is a lot of hunger in St. Petersburg. There's also a very cold winter there, and eventually the people are starting a riot.
The demonstrators take over power in the capital, and Nicholas abdicates.
Everything was going wrong. So he has intimately given in. So at a certain moment when events overtook, he just quit.
Lenin takes power during the October Revolution and establishes the Soviet Union. The former Tsar is now simply known as Nicholas Romanov. He has been placed under house arrest together with his wife and children.
Many of those who should have been faithful to him actually disappeared.
Even his cousin, King George V of Great Britain, declines to help.
There was a question of the Tsar and his family coming to England, being given sanctuary, refuge by England, and the government was prepared for that. But the king is reputed to have said no, he didn't think we should do that. And there are various reasons given. One is that he was scared that a lot of people in England were rather in favor of the Russian Revolution.
In any case, the family would find it difficult to move anywhere, as all 5 children are ill. They have measles, and as a result, their heads are shaved. And as their hair returns, they spend their time laying out a kitchen garden.
The Tsar had a love for physical exercise. He walked a lot. To do something, he chopped wood, sawed logs.
They must have known a long time before what was going to happen to them, but they just didn't dare think about it.
After 4 months of house arrest, the family is told that it is to move to Siberia. They spend over half a year imprisoned in a house in the town of Tobolsk. Time passes slowly for 16-year-old Anastasia and her sisters. We have furnished our room very nicely, in which the four of us live together. And by way of a change, we often sit at the window and look at the people passing by. The family has managed to take a large amount of jewelry with them, which the girls in all secrecy now sew into their corsets, so that no one will discover them. Diamonds, emeralds and rubies. They are soon to be sent to their final place of residence, Yekaterinburg. Here they are kept locked up in a villa, which Lenin's Bolsheviks call the House of Special Purpose. And despite the fact that the First World War is yet to reach its conclusion, Nicholas is informed that Russia must renounce large areas of her territory. Today, telegrams arrived with a message that the Bolsheviks have entered into an armistice under the German government's humiliating conditions. It's a nightmare. The family now lives completely isolated from the rest of the world. This morning, an old decorator gave all the windows in our room a coat of whitewash. Nicholas is aware that things are clearly not as they should be. Our guards avoid speaking with us, as if they'd rather not get involved, and one can feel that they are uneasy and worried. The family is woken in the middle of the night and told that due to disturbances in town, they are to move into the cellar for their own protection. Yet the reality of the situation is somewhat different. They are made to stand in line, after which shots are heard to ring out for 2 to 3 minutes. The officer responsible for the execution is unaware that the girls have sewn jewels into their corsets. Alexei and 3 of his sisters were still alive. They had to be finished off. This surprised the commandant, as we'd aimed for the heart. It was also surprising that the bullets from the pistols ricocheted off something and jumped about the room. When they tried to finish off one of the girls with bayonets, the bayonet could not pierce the corset. Thanks to all of this, the entire procedure took around 20 minutes.
The bodies were thrown down a mine shaft to start with, and then they were taken out and they tried to put acid and burn them, and that didn't work either. So because they were in a hurry to get rid of the evidence, they then dumped them in a swamp.
Nicholas's mother, Maria, has fled to the Crimea together with her daughters, where she is informed that her son and his entire family have been killed.
But she refused to talk about it, even to go to a special prayer at the local church, because she said, no, I don't want to believe it.
In March 1919, soldiers of the Red Army begin an advance on the Crimea.
As the situation worsened, her sister Alexandra sent a battleship to the Crimea, the HMS Marlborough, to get her.
Reluctantly, Maria packs her bags, forced to leave the country she has been devoted to for more than 50 years. HMS Marlborough sails her and her daughter Senia to safety. Her other daughter, Olga, will follow later. On her arrival in Britain, Maria is received by her sister, whom she now despises. Maria has difficulty accepting that Alexandra has become old and weak, and that Alexandra is the most popular woman in the country.
And Maria Feodorovna was only a political refugee, so to speak. And having been known to be somewhat vain also, I'm sure that it did not please Her Majesty to not be the Her Majesty in the country, which she was. So she went to Denmark, which she also loved very dearly, and there she was sort of one of her own kind.
Initially, Maria moves into Amalienborg, where her nephew, King Christian X, also resides. They do not get on particularly well. and when the frugal Danish king one day asks his stubborn aunt to avoid using too many lights, she promptly ensures that every light in the palace is turned on. To everyone's satisfaction, Maria chooses to move to the outskirts of Copenhagen, to Hvidovre, the villa she bought many years ago as a summer house together with her sister Alexandra.
Aunt Minnie, she was very sweet, a lovely looking lady in her age. And she received us, and she had one of these old Cossacks, fantastic big men, who was sort of like a policeman, you know, like a, what do you call them, bodyguards, you call these people nowadays. He was always around Hvidovre to guard her.
Maria Fedorovna, who was born as Dagmar 80 years ago, dies in 1928. She is buried in Denmark, a long way from her beloved Alexander. Back in 1901, Maria's second oldest daughter, Olga, was married for the first time.
When my grandmother reached the age of 18, she was told that she had to marry, and one of her relatives, Prince Peter of Oldenburg, proposed to her.
The arranged marriage with a nearly twice as old Peter of Oldenburg turns into a nightmare for Olga.
She did not know that Peter was not interested in women as women, but only as friends, and this made their marriage quite impossible.
Meanwhile, Olga falls in love with a tall officer, Nikolai Kolikovsky. Her husband refuses to annul the marriage, offering instead to make Kolikovsky his personal adjutant, which would allow the officer to move into the couple's private residence. Kolikovsky serves the ill-matched couple for 13 years before Olga and he are finally given permission to marry.
Princess Olga and her husband Kolikovsky then settled in Denmark after her mother died, and they lived very modestly.
They have 2 sons, and in 1932 they buy a farm outside Copenhagen, which they run themselves.
They went to the market and sold it themselves. Strawberries and vegetables and all sorts of funny things they had.
Olga is an accomplished artist, and she supplements the family's income by selling her paintings. Yet in 1948, the family leaves Denmark.
They were worried that the situation might also deteriorate in Denmark, that Denmark might also fall under the Soviet Empire, and so they moved to Canada.
Here they live in ever more modest circumstances, initially on a farm, and later in a small house. The last Grand Duchess of Russia dies a poor widow in 1960. Amongst her descendants are her grandchild Ksenia Kolikovsky, who grows up with her paternal grandmother in Canada, and her great-grandchild Paul Kolikovsky. Both have spent the majority of their lives in Denmark. Dmitry Romanov, a descendant of Tsar Nicholas I, also lives in Denmark, whilst his older brother Nikolai, who is the current Romanov family patriarch, lives in Switzerland. Maria's oldest daughter, Ksenia, who had fled Russia together with her mother, spent the rest of her life in England. And many of her descendants, including Olga Romanov, continue to live in England today. "80 years after their execution, the remains of Nicholas II and his family are buried in a ceremony in St. Petersburg.
It was held in the fortress of St. Peter and St. Paul because that is where Tsars had been buried since the church was built.
The remains of the imperial family were found in 1979 and have since been identified with the help of DNA testing. Yet not all the children were there.
They're missing 2 members of the family. It's the boy Alexei and one of the Grand Duchess, Maria.
Amongst others present at the funeral are Dmitry and Nikolai Romanov, as well as Prince Michael of Kent. When President Yeltsin arrives, Nikolai Romanov is suddenly informed that he has to receive the president.
So I took Michael of Kent, who was standing next to me. He was the only close relative a foreign close relative. So he said, Michael, you come along. He looked so much like Tsar Nicholas, I thought it'd make a good impression on Yeltsin. And then he went, shook hands with Michael. I kissed Mrs. Yeltsin's hand. She was already crying. She cried through the whole ceremony.
In the next episode, we will meet the father-in-law of Europe's middle son, Prince Wilhelm, who is made King of Greece, aged 17 years old. We will hear about a boy who becomes king, aged 6, and a king who dies after being bitten by an ape.
There was nobody who had the courage to cut the king's leg off. There was no penicillin in those days. And he died of gangrene, really.